Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Now, earlier this week, Joseph Gordon-Levitt officially signed on to produce the new Sandman film, with further talks to star and potentially even direct. And in doing so, he made up Marvel's mind for who's going to be their Ant-Man. As you might recall, it was down to Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Paul Rudd for the role, but Warner Brothers found a way to keep JGL in-house by giving him this Vertigo comic, Sandman. And for those of you who don't know, Vertigo is the indie label of DC Comics. And I think that's a much better fit for Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It's something for him to really sink his teeth into as a filmmaker. And he has very artistic sensibilities in that regard. And I think this is a better fit all around, because I think Paul Rudd is the right choice for Ant-Man. I think this even has the potential to be as good casting as Robert Downey Jr. for Tony Stark and Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner. And speaking of the Science Bros, I think this is going to be Hank Pym, by the way, for Ant-Man, so he'll be interacting with those guys, at least to some degree, and I think that's fantastic. Now, that might be why they might have cast an older actor. There's also rumors that Hank Pym, or maybe it might be Scott Lang because of this rumor, will be a father. Cassie Lang will be brought in to add more, maybe a family feel to it. I think that's sketchy. Also, the idea that Rashida Jones will be playing Janet Van Dyne, also sketchy. So this Ant-Man property isn't out of the woods yet, but so far so good. So maybe that's why they cast an older actor to interact with Downey Jr. and Ruffalo. But still, it's refreshing to see these older actors still get these roles instead of going for the 20-somethings, as they've been doing more typically with these comic book films. And I hope that Marvel, who's blazing the path with this age-blind casting, will do so with actresses eventually as well. As I've said before, I think Elizabeth Banks would be a fantastic Carol Danvers, but we'll see where they go with that role. But back to Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. Now, something that's being discussed in a lot of the trades this morning is whether or not this is a smart choice financially. Paul Rudd has a very spotty box office track record, and this is something I discussed with the JGL Sandman news. And I know a lot of you are probably beginning to type again about, you shouldn't just take into account box office, and why is that the main factor, and why were you upset about it with JGL, but you feel better about it with Paul Rudd? I'll explain that in just a moment for the specifics for those two. But as for the overall question, that happens to be the viewer question of the day, so I'll get to that at the end of the episode in general. But as for Paul Rudd, sometimes casting just seems right, and I think that this is one of those cases. I think he's going to bring a curiosity factor to the project to see Paul Rudd do an action film. And I think, as we saw that Edgar Wright did so successfully with Michael Cera, he can turn just anybody into an action hero, a believable action hero. However, bringing up Scott Pilgrim, that film had very good action sequences, and I think it was well cast as well. But audiences at that point had just tired of Michael Cera, or perhaps never really warmed to him. The mainstream never really warmed to him, despite some of his more cultish appeal at that point. And that could very well happen again here. A lot of fanboys could get excited. And fanboys, though, by the way, didn't even turn up for Scott Pilgrim. Total disaster at the box office. So I think that Marvel is taking a risk here, but I'm not quite sure. I feel that Paul Rudd maybe potentially is a little bigger than that. If I were Kevin Feige, I'd call Paul Rudd up and say, look, I think it's wonderful that you like to make these small independent films that go direct to video to help out your filmmaker friends. Paul Rudd has a lot of content. He's built up a lot of connections over the years, sticking around, even though he wasn't always doing so well, business-wise with his career. And I think very admirably, Paul Rudd will often attach himself to a friend's film to see it get made, which is great. But if I were Kevin Feige, I'd say that's wonderful. We love that about you. But why don't you just take a break for a while? He might not have the time, but he really needs to strengthen his box office persona. And coming off of Anchorman 2, which I think is going to be very big, will help him for sure as well. And Paul Rudd, by the way, very professional actor. I've interviewed him twice at junkets for Admission, and also Prince Avalanche, and both times he was a pro. He, answered all the questions. He didn't play any crazy games. He wasn't distracted. He wasn't tired from a long day of interviews. He was marathoning it, and he's just a really cool guy. And I think Marvel has found someone like Tom Hiddleston, for instance, and Robert Downey Jr., until he got them over a barrel with those contract negotiations, will work very hard to promote the franchise. And I'm excited to see him get in the mix, as I said. I think Paul Rudd is a good ensemble player and will mix quite well with the Avengers eventually, if he makes it to Avengers 3. Let's see how Ant-Man does. But I'm very, very excited for this casting, and it feels right for some reason. Sometimes you know it when you see it, it just clicks. And I think he was between those two. I think he was a great choice. But get Rashida Jones out of there. I think Paul Rudd needs all the help he can get. Get him an actress who has some more credibility and is a little bit more in favor with the mainstream. So that's the first story for the day. We'll see how that works out. The second story of the day is back at Warner Brothers. Let's head back over to Warner Brothers for some Batman, Superman news, or whatever they're calling it. I guess let's just call it Trinity maybe going forward. I'm not sure. But people are saying, a lot of the headlines this morning are, hey, don't get upset with Ben Affleck. He's already fixing this thing. He's bringing in the screenwriter, Chris Terrio, who won an Oscar for Argo, to punch up the script. And as we've all been saying here, I'm very loud about this. David Goyer shouldn't be the final pass on any script. So I don't even think he should be writing them. I think, as I've said before, idea man. I think that his execution of ideas is weak and not particularly compelling. But bringing in Chris Terrio is very exciting. I'm glad that Warner Brothers is listening to Ben Affleck. Charlie Hunnam is probably like, God damn it. See, I wanted to fix 50 Shades of Grey. They even brought in someone to fix the script after I left. But, this is interesting. It speaks again to Hollywood's overall lack of respect for screenwriters, that actors have to be like, man, I am not saying these lines. Remember, of course, the famous Harrison Ford quote to George Lucas. He's like, George, you can write this crap, but it's another thing to actually say it. So I'm glad that Chris Terrio is coming on board. It's a little bit nerve-wracking that the film needs to be fixed, but at least they're fixing it. So that's the first good news about that film. But the other thing, I think the bigger headline is that Joaquin Phoenix is now being considered a frontrunner. Variety broke the story, so I guess it has some officialness to it, for Lex Luthor. I think this is a horrible idea. I'm sorry. I know a lot of you feel I'm out to get DC. I love the DC properties. I love the DC comics. I want to see them succeed. But I just feel after Michael Shannon chewed all that scenery in Man of Steel, I don't want to see another actor do that in the sequel. And I feel that, sorry, Joaquin Phoenix, I know he's a very well-regarded actor, but he's a bit of a scene chewer. Let's just be honest here. And I don't want to see a whiny crybaby Lex Luthor. Some people are saying, oh, this has the potential to be the Heath Ledger kind of casting for the Joker. But Lex Luthor isn't a Joker type of villain. Lex Luthor isn't insane. I know sometimes he's depicted that way, but I think the most compelling version of Lex Luthor is the very sane version. That makes him even scarier. And I wanted to see an actor who had more gravitas, a more adult actor, who wasn't just going to be like, I'm having a mood swing, somebody put a stop to me, it's like, I think I'm very, very worried about that. I wanted Bryan Cranston was my pick. He's apparently too busy to do this kind of stuff. I still feel that Warner Brothers, Kevin Tsujihara should have driven to his house with a checkbook and said, what's it going to take, Cranston? But that didn't happen. And then I thought this Denzel Washington rumor was even something I'd be interested in. I just, because you see a similarity to both those actors. They're very adult actors, for lack of a better word. I know Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill are adults. Ben Affleck more so than Henry Cavill. But, I wanted someone who was going to ground the second film, which I think that the first film desperately needed. Russell Crowe, I think, was supposed to provide that. He did to some degree, but I think these other actors would have done a better job. And it would have made for a more substantial villain. Lex Luthor isn't a spoiled brat. He is, he's a rock. And that's, at least, in terms of his will, his iron will. And I think that I've questioned Joaquin Phoenix's ability to do that. I mean, isn't Joaquin Phoenix's whole calling card his ability to lose his shit? So I'm just very nervous about that casting. All right, so let's hope it doesn't happen. All right, so the third story of the day is there has been an unexpected twist to the success of Frozen. And that is that Josh Gad, who voices Olaf, has been tapped to star in a Gilligan's Island film adaptation. I think that, to me, that, Olaf, he had his moments in the movie. I think he ended up being one of the most energetic aspects of it. And actually, when I watched the film, he was a welcome break from a lot of the problems I had with it. But I do have to say, Gilligan was a very difficult character. Some people are saying because of Josh Gad's weight that he might be the skipper. Totally Gilligan, I think, for sure. And also, you might have noticed that Josh Gad has lost a lot of weight, actually, recently. So he could play Gilligan. And who cares? Who cares what Gilligan looks like? It's getting the heart of Gilligan. But I think Gilligan was a tough sell as a TV show, and that was only for 30 minutes at a time. And I think this annoying humor, the Urkel, did I do that? He was a supporting character, remember, on Family Matters? Those are hard to watch. I even thought Jennifer Lawrence was frustrating in American Hustle as an annoying character. So I don't know, but I think that Olaf to Gilligan, is a very easy leap to make. And good for Josh Gad. It's nice to see him getting some success off of Frozen. I think they really used him a lot to promote the film. He worked very hard to promote it. He was a good team player. I think it's great when actors do the studio a solid. So, but will anybody see a Gilligan movie? I don't know. I would be really hard pressed. I guess it depends on who else they cast. But you know, I'm not a big Josh Gad fan. And Frozen actually is the only time he's delivered. He had that short-lived sitcom. You know, he was okay in Jobs. He actually was pretty good in Jobs. But again, supporting role. These in small doses. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. The viewer question, as I promised, is from Irian42. A lot of you actually brought this up in the last morning movie news about Sandman, but Irian42, I like the way from Jan. I think that's a girl, a boy, I'm not sure. Okay, but from Jan, I thought Jan put it best and said, Grace, when discussing casting choices, you and other critics often focus on past box office successes or failures, and not if the actor is artistically the right choice or their acting ability. Can you explain why that is the case? Great question. As you can see, it's on a lot of people's minds, Jan, so let's discuss. The reason is that sometimes, no matter how good an actor is, audiences just don't like them. It's a sad fact. Sometimes people just don't click. You might wonder, why did this actor never succeed? I personally adore them. But the problem is that, on the whole, they're not adored. And so box office is a gauge of that acceptance factor from the audience. So that's why, first of all, box office is considered when casting. It's really not, it's not so much a financial decision, but really actually like a litmus test as to whether or not audiences like this actor. Now, sometimes you can argue, okay, the actor wasn't in the right role. But that's why you look and see what they're doing. And maybe when you do an outside-of-the-box casting like this Paul Rudd property, Paul Rudd going into Ant-Man, that's something so different that it might, as I said, bring in a curiosity factor. It might pique people's interest. However, Paul Rudd has had such bad box office results, it might not be enough, which is why this is iffy, but I think it's worth a roll of the dice because it just seems like the right casting. Now, with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, my problem there was that you have two risks. You have a risky actor in the lead, and that Joseph Gordon-Levitt just does not deliver at the box office, at least so far, but consistently. And then you have a risky property. You're putting risk with risk. Sandman is a tough sell. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is a tough sell. Whereas with the Ant-Man casting, Paul Rudd might be a tough sell, but Ant-Man is not such a tough sell. It is coming way down the line in a slew of Marvel movies where basically you have a very loyal audience at this point, which will, I think, at least in a couple 100 million range, that number of audience members will go and see a Marvel movie. So you have that level of success, so people will see Paul Rudd in the role. Whereas Joseph Gordon-Levitt, new property, actor not particularly well, doesn't really known for bringing people into the theater, neither is the property. So as I'm saying, you don't want to pair risk with risk, you want to put risk with sure thing almost. That's when it works best. And also, I think people like to believe, and fans like to believe, and I think that's great, that an actor can break the cycle. But unfortunately, they rarely do. It's amazing how consistent these box office opens are. Not only for actors, but also directors, you'll see. Ryan Gosling, for instance. I love Ryan Gosling. I think Ryan Gosling is a wonderful on-screen persona. I think he's really compelling and really fantastic to watch and really makes great choices. However, the guy consistently doesn't open at the box office. Just audiences aren't interested in him. The mainstream audiences just don't want to see him. So I think when casting him, that would have to be taken into account now, that he's been pretty much rejected by audiences. So that's why box office is brought into account. It's not as mercenary as you might think. It's the popularity contest. These actors have been floated out before, and they've been rejected. Audiences said, you know what? I don't like that guy. I don't like that girl. They might have done a great job in the role, but you know what? I just don't like them. I don't think they're worth my money. And so that's the issue that you're looking at, and that's why it's brought up. And, movies are not, I know a lot of people like to think of them as art forms. They are mass-produced art that needs mass approval. Whereas fine art or theater, that is a smaller audience you need to get. So you can, focus more on artistic talent. But when you're going for the masses, when you need to sell thousands, tens of thousands of movie tickets, millions of movie tickets sometimes, hopefully, you need to cast the widest net of appeal. So that's where that's coming from. And I think you have to, really what it boils down to is you have to remember these movies are business decisions. These casting choices are a business decision. It's not it's not just make the best movie possible, which of course, contributes to a movie doing well, but it's also make the most, the film that can perform the best at the box office. Because at the end of the day, Hollywood is not a non-profit. It's a profit business. It needs to make money. These movies need to make money. They cost so much money to make. You can't ask a studio to sink tens of millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars into a budget and not want to get their money back. They're not doing that out of the goodness of their heart to give a fantastic film that, a couple of people really, really love. They're putting all that money into it to get an amazing return by making a movie that tons of people love, or maybe not even love. That's not necessary. That tons of people will go to see. So it's a sad fact of the movie industry, but the main point of making a movie is to sell tickets, not to make the best movie possible. Even when you want to make a great movie, it's to get those box office rewards, and to then to get the box office rewards when the movie wins awards. People go, oh, look, it won so many awards, I should go and see it. That's very important. I think 12 Years a Slave's inability to perform at the box office, despite all the accolades it's getting, is worrisome, and I think might hurt Steve McQueen and Chiwetel Ejiofor down the line. Michael Fassbender's already Magneto, so he's good. But I think that, that's concerning, because at the end of the day, even when an actor wants to win that Oscar, it's so that audiences go, hey, you know what? I didn't like that actor so much before, but they have an Oscar. Maybe I should go check them out. This is all factors in. It's all about, at the end of the day, getting the person to, I guess at this point, click the button on the internet to buy a ticket. All right, so that's my answer to your question. Thank you, Jan. I hope that clarifies things a little bit. Thank you so much for your question. And for those of you wondering, just really quick, it just occurred to me, with Paul Rudd, people might not buy a ticket, but I said, curiosity factor, Paul Rudd, action hero. I think that's the twist. Just like it was for Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr., action hero. Mark Ruffalo, action hero. I think that, and I hope Paul Rudd pulls it off. If he pulls it off, that'll help tremendously. So that's today's morning movie news. Thank you for tuning in. Write down below what you think of today's three stories, as well as the viewer question, and whatever you'd like to see covered tomorrow, as well as any questions you might have. Thanks for watching.